Pokémon Colosseum has a mystique within the Pokémon franchise, or at least as much mystique as anything this side of Computer Warrior Porygon and Pokémon Green Sprites can get in this franchise. A spin-off that directly translates mainline Pokémon gameplay into a more curated and mature context, Colosseum represents a dead end in the franchise that, outside of its direct sequel, XD Gale of Darkness, will likely never be seen again. Now, when I say a mature context, keep in mind that I mean mature for 8-year-olds and compared to other Pokemon games. Mechanics from ubiquitous double battles, stealing Pokemon from other trainers, and aesthetic choices like the Southwest-inspired world, the general decrepitness of the town and inhabitants, playing as an anti-hero and driving around a big Mad Max motorcycle with excessive pistons and exhaust pipes, moves the target audience from about 5 years and up to still 5 years and up, but now badass if you're 8. I don't mean this to be derogatory towards the game. When I was 9, me and my friends thought this game was the absolute coolest, and we would often play it when we were together instead of the GBA games. Not having a link cable made it an easy decision, but we were always in awe of that big motorcycle. For us 8-year-olds, there was just nothing like it, and there never would be again. I remember getting Pokemon Battle Revolution when I was 10 and being disappointed that it wasn't like Colosseum. Had the battles, but not the story, the setting, nor the adventure, and from that point on, Colosseum has been, for me and many others in my age bracket, the Pokemon game that stands out from the rest. The question today is if it still holds up. In the 20 years since Colosseum, there's so much of the gaming landscape that has changed, and a lot of it is completely unrecognizable, but Pokemon has remained stalwart. It's the same now as it was then, and so Colosseum remains to this day an outlier. I first played the game after my dad bought it for me for my birthday from Meyer of all places in 2004 when I played it alone in my bedroom, and I've gone back to revisit it in 2023 on stream with dozens of others, and to my surprise, the game not only holds up, it's actually pretty good. As I've grown up, Pokemon has become more and more of a memory. I've kept up with the games, but I've enjoyed them less both on release and in retrospect as time has gone on. It's not like the games are mechanically worse, they are in a lot of ways mechanically better, but my interest has waned, and the games have gently faded into the comfort of nostalgia. Replaying Pokémon Colosseum was the most fun I've had with the series since I was a kid, and that's largely to do with two major mechanical departures that the game takes from the mainline series. The first is that the roster of playable Pokémon is trimmed down significantly. 52 total Pokémon are available in the game without any special transfers or bonus discs or e-readers, and when you remove the post-game Pokémon and the few that you catch right at the tail end of the game, there's only about 43, and even then, some of them such as Tropius and Skarmory come right at the end of the main game, just before the final boss gauntlet. The roster in Pokémon Colosseum is mostly structured around the needs of the Gen 3 Pokédex, so that many of the holes can be filled by transferring them over to Ruby and Sapphire. The result is a ton of Gen 2 Pokemon and a steady stream of slop. Yanma, Remoraid, Piloswine, Furret, Skiploom, Sunflora, the list goes on of absolute crap that this game gives you. While many of the Pokemon aren't necessarily bad or unusable, the amount of resources available to make them work is limited, both by the small pool of TMs in the game and by many Pokemon coming in at higher levels, making a curated moveset more difficult to attain. The limited roster of playable Pokemon means that a well-rounded team with solid type coverage often comes with compromises. Calling the roster a collection of scrubs is misleading because there are good Pokemon here, including your starters, Umbreon and Espeon, 2 good Johto starters to choose from, and the legendary dogs. The issue is that many of the good Pokemon overlap one another in type coverage. Flaffy and Raikou, Quilava and Entei, Feraligatr and Suicune and Quagsire, Altaria and Flygon, they all overlap. whereas some other types like Bug and Grass have a bunch of shitty options like Jumpluff and Yanma, while others like Ghost have only one option. The one option is Mischievous, and it's a good example of how going back to play Colosseum is also an adjustment back to Generation 3 Pokemon. The physical special split doesn't yet exist, and some Pokemon don't yet have their later gen evolutions. Mischievous gets good when it gets to evolve into Mismagius and take advantage of its good special attack, but in Colosseum, the lowly Mischievous is your only Ghost option, and it has to shoot physical Shadow Balls. What's fun about all this is that building a team in Colosseum is all about scraping excess value from Pokemon that you'd otherwise ignore in the main games. Throughout my 22 hours of playtime, I never felt like I had a complete team that was equipped to deal with everything. Some types like Dark or Grass Water or Water Ground are tough to deal with since good fighting, bug, flying, and grass type moves are hard to come by and even harder to find on offensively capable stab Pokemon. It's worth noting that the enemy trainers in this game suffer none of the roster restrictions that the player does, as they have access to the entirety of the Pokédex through Gen 3. Some players who like the much wider roster pool and customization afforded by the mainline games may not enjoy Colosseum's restrictions, but for the right player, myself included, these restrictions create a fun challenge that's fun to work through. I just love having to be creative with limited options. The second major mechanical change is that all battles are now double battles. Pokemon's battle system is deceptively simple with a low skill floor and a very high skill ceiling. In single player, many mechanics and moves that thrive in competitive simply don't matter. When it comes to the minutia of EVs and IVs and natures and abilities, I think it's good that they don't matter at all in single player, but the extensive selection of support moves being irrelevant is kinda lame. Double battles have the benefit of not requiring extensive meta knowledge while also making more moves useful and battles more dynamic. On a challenge level, double battles are harder because they effectively force set mode as a playstyle. There's never a free opportunity to switch Pokemon unless one dies, and even then, it's not always free because enemies can still be targeting that spot on the field. Conversely, this means that the player can take advantage of defensive typing on switch out much more often than in single battles, as well as moves like Protect having more situational usefulness. Other moves like Reflect and Light Screen don't feel like as much of a waste during double battles, and support moves get to shine. Helping Hand is a move that I have never, ever used in a single player Pokemon game, but in Colosseum, I ran it on two Pokemon, Espeon and Plusle, and found it frequently useful. There would be niche situations like Helping Hand into Surf to kill a diving Ludicolo, but also double battles combined with interesting enemy team comps means that there wasn't always a clear or viable offensive target for Plusle or Espeon, but they could create an opportunity for their partner to one-shot a target. Terrain effects also benefit from this. In the same way that Plusle used Helping Hand to get Suicune to kill a Ludicolo, Suicune can return the favor by setting up a Rain Dance to give Plusle 100 accuracy Thunder and kill the final Pokemon of the final boss, and yes, I completed the game with a level 3 Plusle in my party. Plusle is a Pokemon that is ass in almost all circumstances, and it pretty much still is ass in Colosseum, but the double battle format and its extra EXP gain from being an in-game trade Pokemon gives it a lot more value that you can build around. The legion of bad mons the game gives you becomes more fun to use because the double battle format demands more utility beyond big-time offense. These are not the only changes that the game makes to the Pokemon formula, but they're certainly the best two. I don't want to paint a picture of the platonic ideal of a Pokemon game because the game has other divisive changes and some engine issues. On the engine issues first, because it's the most simple, the game is slow. Attacking takes a long time. Dying takes a long time. Battle effects take a real long time. Even the pause between the end of a turn and the start of the next turn takes a long time. With no option to turn animations off, it can make the game somewhat of a slog with a ton of downtime. I never felt that the game was too slow, but I was also streaming the game, and that by itself warped my perception of it as I had the opportunity to chat with 30 to 40 people at a time about various nonsense during slow sections, an opportunity that most players don't get. All I can say is get some YouTube videos or some podcasts ready because there's plenty of time for them. I recommend watching the John Boyce team history videos because you'll certainly have more than enough time to watch both of them during Colosseum's animations. For some players, the slowness will kill the game entirely, but being too slow is hardly an interesting problem to have. What is a lot more interesting and frustrating is the Shadow Pokemon mechanic. Colosseum's story is fairly simple. The player character, Wes, or in my case Bopper, is a member of Team Snag'em, the standard, low-rent criminal gang that populates every region. He betrays Team Snag'em and steals the Snag Machine, a tool that allows its user to steal Pokemon from other trainers. Team Snag'em, being bums, aren't running the Orre region, and instead are a vassal gang to Team Cypher, a malicious suzerain that takes Pokemon stolen by Snag'em and corrupts them, turning them into Shadow Pokemon. Why? Make a shitload of money, of course, and take over the world on the side. It might not be complicated or ideological, but I respect it. The Orre region is a destitute wasteland. There are few towns, and outside of the provincial Agate village, the population centers are hot, dry, poor, and infested with crime. This Phoenix, Arizona-inspired region is a lonely, shitty frontier ripe for some easy pickings, and it's one of the game's great strengths. The Shadow Pokemon are violent and deranged, which makes them both good attack dogs for Cypher, as they're one of the few villains in the series that consistently attacks people to enforce their rule, and it makes Pokemon battles violent spectacles, which plays very well in the battle Colosseums littered around Orre. Battles that I'm sure generate tons of gambling revenue, but gambling isn't mentioned because this is an E-rated family game, but come on. Cypher is just the mob. Part of Wes's plan to destroy Cypher is to gather as many Shadow Pokemon as he can and purify them. The problem is that purification is a grindy, boring slog. Each Shadow Pokemon comes with a corruption bar, in lieu of an experience bar that must be depleted before the Pokemon can be purified. At the beginning of the purification process, a Shadow Pokemon only has the move Shadow Rush, a typeless recoil move that is strong but boring. As the corruption is drained, more and more of the Pokemon's moveset is slowly unlocked. Corruption is drained through standard happiness mechanics, items, fighting in battle, calling a Pokemon if it goes into hyper mode, a pseudo-rabid state that Shadow Pokemon sometimes enter. Shadow Pokemon also don't gain experience, but they do pocket it and gain it once they are successfully purified. Early on, none of this is an issue. The difficulty is low enough at the start, and the fights are simple enough that many of the early Shadow Pokemon will naturally be purified without the player needing to go out of their way. However, as the game goes on, purification becomes increasingly grindy and invasive. Colosseum is, relative to most Pokemon games, challenging, and sacrificing a team spot for a Shadow Pokemon that doesn't have a complete moveset and can't level up is, it's a problem. It kills the pace of the game. With no wild Pokemon, there is one place in the game built for grinding, and that's Mount Battle. A 100-stage battle tower, many of the early fights feature Pokemon lower level than the tutorial fight at the beginning of the game. Such low-level stomps exist seemingly to be a Shadow Pokemon purification machine, as there are only two in-game Pokemon, Plusle and Remoraid, that need enemies that weak for battle experience. Well, Slugma, also, I guess, because Slugma is straight cheeks, do not use it. The Shadow Pokemon mechanic is interesting, both narratively and mechanically early on, but the mechanics don't age well as the game goes on. And it makes it increasingly annoying to try out new Pokemon, although I suppose it does have the unintended benefit of preventing the truly deranged from using the Sunflora you catch in the final dungeon. Yeah, go grind that up and use it against the Metagross the penultimate boss throws at you. Let's see how that goes. The other problem caused by Shadow Pokemon is catching them. Catching Pokemon has always been annoying, and it's only been made retroactively more annoying by Let's Go and Legends Arceus, and I think there's a case that catching Pokemon is at its absolute worst in Colosseum. Catching Pokemon is, at its heart, an RNG affair. You You can cook the numbers to be in your favor, you can damage the target, you can inflict status effects, but at the end of the day, it all comes down to spinning the roulette wheel and hoping it lands on red. This problem is most exaggerated with legendary Pokemon since you only have one chance to catch them. In essence, every Pokemon in Colosseum is a legendary since you only have one chance to catch them during the main game, and to make matters worse, they are all caught during trainer fights and boss fights, so you must survive first the Gauntlet of the Trainer and the RNG Gauntlet of the Pokeballs. Early on, no big deal. Colosseum doesn't copy over the catch rates for Pokemon from the base games. Instead, it scales them based on when in the game you encounter each Pokemon. Generally, the early Pokemon, including the Johto starters, have extremely high catch rates, while the late game Pokemon have incredibly low catch rates. For example, the Tyranitar at the end of the game has a catch rate of 10. What does that mean exactly? I don't know, except to say that it's incredibly low and makes it harder to catch than just about any other Pokemon in the series. There are times when you will just lose a fight, and consequently half of your money because you don't catch the Pokemon you're trying to get. And losing half your money sucks because Pokeballs are a finite resource that costs money, and when a catch fails, you lose the ball for good. It's all such a pain in the ass, but it is mitigated by a small little oversight. See, if you select a Pokeball with your first action in a turn, go ahead, open up the item menu with your second Pokemon, and swap that ball's location with another item using the X button. For reasons known only to God and Genius Sonority, this causes the ball to not be used, effectively giving the player infinite Pokeballs of any type. Is this cheating? Yes. Did I do it for my entire playthrough? Yes. Did it mean I fundamentally altered the experience of the game? Yeah. Do I regret it? No. Would I do it again? Yes. Would I recommend that you cheat? Oh, absolutely. In a lot of ways, it's honestly more convenience than anything else until you get the Master Ball. Because yes, the glitch works with the Master Ball as well, meaning the player has a one-shot, super priority move against every Shadow Pokemon during the final stretch of the game, and I used it because I'm shameless and because the power was too tempting. I don't think this counts in making the game better, but it made my time more enjoyable, and I'll never not do it for the rest of my life. However, none of this matters. None of it means a thing in the face of how this game looks and sounds. Pokemon is not a powerhouse series for great music. Most of the music is good, or at least serviceable. There are some great tracks, Lavender Town, Little Root Town, you know the good ones. The Colosseum soundtrack, though, is the best OST in the series. Almost every track rips from Mirror B's theme to the Funky Town-inspired theme, and the only thing that upstages it are the battle animations. Some are taken directly from Pokémon Stadium 1 and 2, and those do look like Nintendo 64 models, but all the animations themselves, from the recycled to the new, are full of character and life. Especially the fainting animations. They fill each of the little twerps with so much personality, and it puts the entire 3DS and Switch eras of Pokemon to shame. Obviously, this small roster is easier to carefully animate or recycle than a giant mainline roster, but I can only judge by what I see, not the reasons for it. So, does Pokémon Colosseum hold up? I say yes, but for some people also no, and it's complicated. Your mileage may vary is the unfortunate truth of the matter, but what I think helps this game stand up is that no matter what problems it may have, it remains one of the most interesting Pokemon games, both for its narrative and its deviation from the formula, and its aesthetics, and for its batshit awful decisions that are more the product of misplaced or undercooked ambition rather than studio meddling and crunch. This game does have a sequel, XD Gale of Darkness, that has less of a reputation than Colosseum, although it did come with a giant Lugia card. Perhaps I will revisit it next. But for now, I am glad that I bumbled and cheated my way through Colosseum and laid to rest a game from my childhood that was just a little too hard back then and, for 9-year-old me, super badass and edgy. I think there's a lot to like, even in 2023.